Thank you all for joining us this evening. We are going to do Parsha Vayigash. It's been a few weeks. There's a few things we had gone. There's a dinner, and then there was Hanukkah, which on the contrary, Hanukkah should have been a time we had a class, but there was some Hanukkah parties that we had to go to. And now it's a great time to learn Torah also, because in the past Jews, there's always a time of learning Torah. And especially tonight, especially tonight when throughout the ages, this was a time that was a time of persecution for the Jewish people. The Jewish people would always be hiding and lock their doors because there was always pogroms and things going on. It's really a special time to make sure to show that at the darkest time of the year, right? What is our light is the Torah, right? What makes us strong is the Torah, and the fight. This is so special. What's such special? Are you guys waiting upstairs? Oh, okay. This is you guys. It's such a special guest to have you guys in person. Thank you, guys. All right, if you want to grab a hummus, you don't have to, but if you want to grab a hummus, you can. Otherwise, you don't have to, whatever you want, right? But I was just saying that, tonight is, every night we learn Torah, every night is special to learn Torah, but especially tonight, where throughout the ages, this was a time of persecution for the Jewish people. It was a time when Jewish people locked their doors, right? Because the people come out all riled up, and of course everything was always, blame the Jews. They are the one that killed their Yashka and everything like that. And it was a time of persecution. We even Baruch Hashem nowadays, it's not a time of persecution. And as we spoke about in the past, sometimes that's more dangerous because unfortunately we have people that celebrate it, right? Either you celebrate it through eating Chinese, which I still don't get the whole connection. I think it's just, those only restaurants that were open at the time, right? That's probably what it was, right? Either you go and eat Chinese, hopefully kosher Chinese, right? Or unfortunately, there are people that celebrate it a little bit, right? And we have to remind ourselves that our power is the Torah. Our power is who we are, and this is no different than any other day in the calendar. Right? There's nothing special, and we go ahead and we ensure that we learn Torah, and we bring the light of the Torah, right, into the darkness of the exile, which we're going to talk about soon in this week's parsha. Right? And thank you for joining us on this in this class today, because there's no better day to have a class than to infuse the light of the Torah into our souls, into our neshama, into the Jewish people. We're on page 250, 250 in the Hebrew, 251 in the English, and it's Parsha Vayigash. So just because we missed the last few parshios, so just very quickly catch ourselves up. This is probably, from the stories of the Torah, right? These past few parshias are probably the most exciting, right? And it's not something that you can make up, right? I think some of the greatest authors probably would have had a hard time making these stories up, to the details, especially when you start reading the midrashim behind the scenes of what's going on. And it really starts off with 2 weeks ago with Parsha Vayigash, right? When Yaakov, when Yosef has his dreams, and he goes ahead and he tells him, and his brothers get upset, and his father says, "Hey, your mother's not here," but he understands it, and then his brothers sell him, right, to exile, and Reuven said not to sell him, put him in the pit. Then they put him in the pit, but then they saw this caravan coming down, and they said, "Okay, sell him." They sold him down to Egypt, and then the story goes of him being down in Egypt. He sold to Potiphar, right? He became all of a sudden second in command in the house. And his master's wife wanted to have relations with him, and he ran out, and she blamed him, even though she was the one, right? And then he was thrown into the pit, Okay, so then he became second in command in the pit, which was a jail at the time. It happened to be that two of Paro's servants were thrown at the same time. They had dreams. Right, Yosef interprets it to them, and it was Paro had a party, and it was interpreted correctly. Right, in the middle over there's a story of Yehuda and Tamar, right, thrown in, where Yehuda goes away from his brothers because he was demoted, because he's the one that decided to sell Yosef. And he marries the lady. She has kids, and then one of the kids marries Tamar. They die, and the whole story. At the end of the day, right? Tamar, realizes that she has a prophecy that she should have children from Yehuda, but she realizes it's not from his children. So she pretends that she's a Zona, right? And she sits on the side of the road, a prostitute, and she has relations with him. Yehuda finds out she's pregnant, wants to kill her. She said, "Oh, whoever is this Tafar, that's who." And Yehuda realizes. He said, "Oh, wow, she's righteous with me." The stories are just unbelievable. Then we started last week's parsha. Paro has a dream. No one can interpret the Sharmashka. Right? Paro's servant said, "Oh, that." I totally forgot, slipped my mind, right? There was this guy with us in jail that he was able to interpret it. Paro brings him up, he interprets it correctly, right? Makes him second in command. He goes from the low to the high, right? Then the whole story with the brothers coming down, and he blames them as Meraglim, right? And he said, "Oh, you have to bring your other brother down." Brings the other brother down, and then he goes ahead and puts the cup inside of Binyamin's things, and they chase him. And he said, "Oh, why do you do this?" He said, "Okay, you could all go free, but he has to be slaves." And Yehuda said, "No way," and that's where this week's parsha starts. Right? Unfortunately, there's so much to talk about the past week's parshas. We did speak about some last year. Right? There's always more to talk about, but we're going to have to focus on this week's parsha. That's sort of a quick summary of these past few parshas, and now we have Vayigash Yehuda. Yehuda comes up to him, right, and approaches him, and he says, "Bi Adoni, listen, my master, right? I'm going to speak in your ear, right? Don't get upset at me. Like you are Paro, like Paro, right? So the commentaries say, just to start off, why was it that Yehuda was the one that sort of took charge over here? All the Shvatim, there were 12, there was 10 of them, right? Why was Yehuda? So generally, we know Yehuda was the leader of the brothers, right? He was destined to be king. They knew that. And so that's sort of the simple answer, right? The commentaries explain, I saw brought down from who was it? I don't remember, right? I saw it brought down. I apologize. I saw it brought down a very fascinating point. It's a very simple point, but a very extremely important point. And the idea is like this: that it says that Yehuda spoke to him. Rashi says, right, that al yichar apcha, don't get upset. He spoke to him harshly. Yehuda spoke to him. He spoke to him harshly. But he said, "Don't get upset. I'm going to speak to you harshly." Very matter of fact, very stern. He spoke to him. What was Yehuda going and antagonizing, speaking harshly? Okay, he's the one that's leader. He's talking, but why did he go to the extent of speaking harshly? So I think it might be Rabbi Schwab or Yaakov Kamenetsky. I don't remember. I was looking at a few different svarim today. And says that there's an idea called a charayas, responsibility. We know in last week's parsha we didn't mention this point, but Yehuda was the one that convinced Yaakov to send Binyamin down. How do you convince by sending Binyamin down? He says, "I'm going to take responsibility on him. If I don't bring him back down, I will forfeit my world to come. I am taking responsibility. It's not who's going to take? I am taking that responsibility." So since he took the responsibility, he was the one that was leading the charge, right, as not only the leader of the brothers, but more so because he was the Baal Achrayus, it's called. Baal Achrayus, a person that takes responsibility for things. And when he takes responsibility for things, he acts upon those responsibilities and enforces that responsibility and ensures that he keeps his commitment. And says the commentaries that I actually gave a class once. It was in Jacksonville. It was lessons from great Jewish leaders, and we spoke about Abraham and different Moshe. Different one of them was King David, right? And the commentators say that one of the character traits of why Yehuda was the one that had King David and had the descendants of the kings, and Mashiach comes from him, is because of this attribute of a Christ taking responsibility. And accountability for the responsibility. It's a very important thing, not just taking responsibility, but the accountability for the responsibility. Ensuring that he fulfills his responsibility, right? And doing whatever he can to enforce that, even if he has to speak harshly and sternly to the leader of you could say, the most powerful kingdom in that time, right? And he didn't know that it was his brother, right? The ruler who, had a magic cup and, convinced Pharaoh he went from nothing to everything in a matter of minutes, right? So even that, he still felt that he had to do that. And it's a tremendous lesson to all of us, right? That we have to take responsibility for our actions, right? We have to take responsibilities for our commitments, and more so, right? When we take responsibility, we have to also make sure that we have that accountability for our responsibility, right? So it's not only saying, yeah, okay, rely on me, but you actually have to be someone that can be relied on. Right? How many times, unfortunately, you have people that mean well, right? And say, yeah, don't worry about it. I'll take care of that. We'll make sure. And you guys come and, what happened? There's nothing going on here. Okay, right? Unfortunately, right, that happens. And that's a lesson. And that's one of the reasons why King David, a leader, has to be someone that has a responsibility. And that's upon each one of us, right? That we have to look internally and say, how could we be more of a person that takes responsibility for our community, for our family, for our synagogue, for the greater community, and then have that accountability to ensure to utilize whatever talents we have, whatever resources we have, right, to make sure to fulfill that responsibility and to be that leader in the community, because that's really what a leader is. A leader is not just someone that sits somewhere and then gives out, this gives the direction and commandments, right? A leader is someone that actually takes that responsibility, is involved, and looks for those opportunities, right? And then gets his or her hands wet, right, to ensure to fulfill those responsibilities. That is a true leader. We find that by wars, David HaMelech went out in front, right? We've seen Shaul HaMelech, right? King Saul was out in the war. He died from that, but he's out in the war. We know Chizkiyahu, the king of another king of the Jewish people. He also died in battle. He was out in the front, not only in physical battle, right, but spiritual battle and communal battle. There's battles happening every day, right? Financial issues, ensuring that there's Torah education, ensuring that the synagogue or the organizations are going on the right path. There's always constantly battles, right, that are being fought. They might not be, sometimes a little smaller, sometimes a little bigger, right? But ensuring to be those people that are on the forefront, right, and taking that responsibility. That is what the Torah is highlighting over here by Yehuda, and that's why kings came out of Yehuda. So that's one idea that we want to talk about today. Okay, let's move on. We're going to skip a little bit, right, just a little bit. If you go down to verse 24, so the verse says like this. It says Judah is speaking to Yosef and sort of repeating a little bit of what happened. He's sort of saying, he's bringing the whole picture back to Yosef. And this is, sometimes, we get so caught up in something and we forget how the whole narrative happened, right? Sometimes you just need to pause for a second. Okay, let's take a step back and look at the whole story and see what happened, right? And see how wrong you are, right? He said, you're the one that asked him to come down. You're the one that blamed that we were Meraglim. You're the one that asked about our father, right? You're the one that knows that our father didn't want, we told you your father doesn't want to send him down, right? You're the one that caused all this. You cannot keep him here. I'll stay instead of him, right? But you cannot keep him here because our father's going to be ill. And he goes and sort of bring this whole story down. Just have a side lesson. I wasn't going to talk about this, but this is just sometimes important. We get so caught up in the here and now, we sometimes forget how the whole story happened, right? How the whole thing happened. And it's important in our Judaism also, right? We have to look at the greater spectrum of our existence of Jewish people, that we are still around. And that only happened because we kept to the Torah, not because we became assimilated into the country that we are, and not because we say that, we're going to only survive if we're kumbaya with, and we have friends from the non-Jewish. Of course, we have to have friends, but that's not what's going to make us a strong community. Not what's going to make us a strong synagogue if we have a friend from a church or from whatever it is. That's not what's going to make us a strong synagogue, going to make us a strong synagogue is our commitment to Torah. It's going to make us a strong synagogue by ensuring that we have a daily minyan. It's going to make us a strong synagogue is making sure that we have Torah classes and youth programs and a touch Shabbat and a good bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah program. That's what's going to make us a strong community and a strong synagogue. Right? Of course, we're grateful that we're at a time where, we have people from the non-Jewish community, they want to be our friends and they send us letters and things like that, but that's not what's going to make us a strong community, right? That is not what we have to look at the greater overall picture of the Jewish people. We've survived, right? Because we're committed to Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chasadim. That's what's going to make us strong. We always have to remember that. But the point I wanted to bring out from this pasuk is the Rashi said something very interesting, quoting the Gemara, right? That Judah said, the word is like this. It says, Avdecha Avi, right? Your servant, our father, right? And Yehuda said that because he thought he was talking to a ruler of a different, from a different country, from a different people. And therefore, out of respect for the ruler, he said, your servant, our father, your servant, right? But the Talmud says, Rashi quotes it, that what's it called again? I think the Rashi quotes it. Rashi says it on verse 19. He says over there also, Adonis Solas Avada. It's quoted that Yosef lost 10 years of his life because he allowed Yehuda to say Avdecha Avi, because it was disrespect for his father, right? He knew that it was his father, and by Yehuda calling his father your servant, that's a lack of kibbud avayim, a lack of respect, right? And therefore it says that Yosef lost 10 years of his life, because if you look at the end of Parsha Vayigash, Yosef died 10 years younger than most of his siblings, right? So he lost 10 years of his life, right? And the commentators say, like, what should he have done? So it's brought down that what he should have done is he should have said, he's not my servant. He's from a different country, right? He didn't want to reveal himself, but he could have said, hey, he's not my servant, right? He's from a different country, right? It's your father, right? He could have interrupted or something, but by him not saying that, right, there was a lack of kibbud avayim. And the lesson over here is twofold. Number one, how far kibbud avayim goes, honoring your father and your mother. But even though Yosef had a reason why he didn't want to interrupt, he didn't want to ruin the whole plan. Right? There's a whole master plan that's going on, and it had to happen. And the Torah seems to approve of this Yosef master plan, right? But since he had a way out that would have looked a little funny, but it wouldn't have necessarily, he would have had to interject Yehuda talking, even though it would have been a little funny, but he had a way of out without revealing his thing. He lost 10 years of his life, right? It shows how important, right, kibbud avayim is. Kibbud avayim is not just the honoring the father and mother, but also not allowing your father and mother to have a dishonor in any way caused by you. And that's one important lesson that we learned. The other important lesson that we learn is that how important our words are, right? The word Avdecha Avi, right? Because he said the words, and Yosef didn't even say those words, but he accepted those words, right? Words make a difference. There's a lack of disrespect on Yosef's part because he allowed those words to be said without any argument, without any introduction, without stopping Yehuda from saying it. How words make a difference and they create reality, right? And therefore he got punished. 10 years of his life he lost, right? Because of that. Right? And it's something just to reflect on, that the words that we use, right? We sometimes we're careless on the words that we use. I myself, I know I have to work on it myself also, but it's important. Sometimes I hear people say the food's disgusting, right? The food is not disgusting. It's not you don't like it. It's not your favorite. It's not my favorite kind of food. I tell this to my kids all the time. Do not say the food is disgusting. It sounds silly, but it's not. Because we have to train ourselves. There's people that like the food, right? And even, hey, sometimes there are food that's disgusting. Let's be honest, right? Like, one time my daughter by mistake put salt instead of sugar into the mix, and we didn't realize. And yeah, that tasted disgusting, right? A long time ago, right? That we were in Jacksonville. I think it was Bathsheba, the one in Israel. Right? The first time she was actually making like a recipe by herself. I think she was 10 or 11 years old. right? But generally, right? But even that, it doesn't taste good, right? There's something off with it. But words make a difference, right? And other times, like, oh, that was so stupid, right? To say that was silly, that was not right. There's ways of saying words that are more refined, right? And a better way of talking than other ways. And it's something important as Jewish people, as human people, especially as Jewish people. Well, we value our words is so important. We see this from here. This next word of Avdaka, right? He got punished for it because he didn't stop him from saying that word. The power of words create reality. It's something for us to reflect on. That the importance of the way we talk, also, even something that we sometimes think is not a problem, just like, oh, that was a really, it was disgusting. It's not your favorite. It wasn't nice. It was maybe not the right behavior, maybe not the right way of doing things, right? But you have to be careful, right, of how you talk, right? And especially, when we get angry and things like that. Unfortunately, nowadays it's like almost normal to use certain words. We call it the F word or the S word or other words like that. It's just sort of become part of our lingo, right? It became part of the national lingo of that's how you express your frustration, right? Like, well, I can't, right? What? Right? It became part of the. How can you have a society that's become part of the lingo, part of like the normal way of talking? Our parents in their houses in front of their kids, they have like no problem saying it. It's like part of the words we say is so important, right? It's just unfortunate that we have a lack of sensitivity for this, and it's something that we have to reinforce within ourselves and educate our children and educate our grandchildren, our community, our anybody that we have a relationship with, to be able to do that, to ensure that the way we talk is crucial. Yosef lost 10 years of his life because of not stopping from saying Avdaka, right? Which Etzem is not even something wrong, right? But for Yosef, since it was his father, right? He lost 10 years of his life, something to reflect on. Okay, let's move on. We're going to move to chapter 45, sorry, verse 14. So after we finally, the Midrash, I encourage you to look up the Midrash. Very interesting Midrashim. The Yalkut Amloes goes through it. I think they might have translated the Yalkut Amloes now in English. I'm not sure. But he goes through the Midrash, how the brothers are starting to, there was a back and forth. They said they threatened war. Yehuda told Naphtali, who was quick like a deer, right, to run around the whole of Egypt to see, the status of their army, right? It says that Binyamin roared and the pillars fell, and it says Yosef told Manasseh, right, his son, to stamp, and he broke pillars. And very interesting how we're starting to get a little, excited. It sounds like some superhero kind of stuff over here, right? Finally, Yosef reveals himself to his brothers, right? And it says, "Oh, Davichai, my father's still alive," right? And then it says that in verse 14, it says, "V'yipal atzarei Binyamin achiv v'yef." Right? It says he fell on his shoulders of his brother and he cried, and Binyamin also cried on his shoulders. So before, right, it also says that Yosef cried, right, when he revealed himself. And over here, it says it again that he cried for Binyamin. Rashi says, what was they crying about? So Rashi says, just confirm that was Rashi, right? Rashi says he cried, why did he cry on Binyamin's shoulders? Because Binyamin, the Beit HaMikdash is built on Binyamin property in Eretz Yisrael. The land was divided into the 12 tribes, so it was half in Binyamin and half in Yehuda, right? The base Kodesh HaKadosh, the majority of it actually is in Binyamin. So he cried because he had the future, knowing that the two Beit HaMikdash are going to be destroyed in Binyamin. That's in Binyamin. So he cried for Binyamin on the destruction of the two Beit HaMikdash. It says Binyamin cried because Binyamin cried in his because of Mishkan Shiloh, right? The Mishkan Shiloh, the tabernacle before the Beis Hamikdash was built, was in Shiloh for the longest time. I forgot the exact amount of years. I think like 250 years or something like that was established in Shiloh. Shiloh is in the property of Yosef, right? So on the destruction of Mishkan Shiloh, Binyamin cried. So the commentaries ask, why can't you just say because they cried as brothers cried? Right? Like they're two brothers. And Yosef was 18 years old when he left. Binyamin was a little boy, right? Not much older. I don't know the exact age, but I think it was somewhere like 6 years old or something, 7 years old. Right? He barely knew his brother. Maybe he was a little older, but he barely knew his brother. And why can't they just say like they cried because they're brothers and they're all brothers. They're brothers from the father and mother, right? And definitely, clearly at the time, it was sort of divided a little bit by being whose mother you were, right? So why can't we just say they cried for that reason? So I saw this idea that we have a similar idea with later on what it says by We're not going to talk. We spoke about this a little bit last year, I think, right? That when Yaakov met Yosef, it says that Yaakov said the Shema, right? He said Shema when he saw him, right? So like now's the time you can't say Shema any other time. Like what happened to me that's right before the time you can't say Shema, like let's wait a few minutes and then say the Shema. Hug your son. You haven't seen him in in over 20 years. Like come on, So we spoke about this idea a little bit, but over here it's a little different. That Yosef and Binyamin, originally when he revealed himself, it says that they all cried, right? And that was a crying for siblings and for themselves. But we're talking about great people, right? Every action they do is not just about themselves. It's about the future of the Jewish people. We're talking about the Shvatim, the 12 tribes. Right? We're not talking about people that are just themselves. Right? Their whole existence is also for the future of the Jewish people. We are determined by the 12 tribes. Right, the 12 tribes that went through the 40 years in the desert, and their different encampments. Right, the 12 tribes that were the land of Israel is divided into their different properties. Right, nowadays we're from Levi. If you're a Cohen and a Levi, you're from Yehuda right. We say now that most of us are from Yehuda or Binyamin because the other 10 were sold into slavery. Right, but that's a different discussion. But the tribes were sort of the beginning of the Jewish people. And therefore, when the Torah goes ahead and expands and says that they cried each one on their shoulder and individualizing it doesn't say that they fell on each other's shoulders and they cried. Right? No, it says that Yosef cried on his shoulder and the Torah doesn't say extra things, and it says already before that they cried. Right? So why is the Torah going ahead and expressing that they cried on again and individually, each one mentioning each one? There must be the Torah's teaching us that they saw the pain of what this tribe was going through, right, in exile. Destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, destruction of the Shiloh specifically, not just of their children going into exile. Because the destruction of these institutions is what caused the exile to start and is really the greatest pain of the exile of our place of worship, of our place of learning that's destroyed. A place of a connection to Hashem is destroyed. Of course, we can connect to Hashem everywhere, right? But the intensity place and where we have that relationship and the connection to Hashem was destroyed, that's what they focused on and that's what they cried about. And even back then, when they had the excitement of seeing each other, they had this vision of what's going to happen, and they said, I'm so excited to see you, but what's going to happen to our descendants later on, right? And because a leader and someone that's constantly someone that has a constant relationship with Hashem and someone's constantly concerned about the Jewish people is always thinking about how to ensure or the pain of others, right, and the pain of the destruction of Torah. And that's what's going on over here, and that's something for us to reflect on, and it's always something to take away from that. We don't have visions of what's going to happen later on, right? We don't know what's going to happen, but at least now, right? At least now, let's yes, thank God we're doing well and we're enjoying, but feel the pain of our brethren, right? That are stuck other places that don't have it as good, or even here, or feel pain for someone that's in the hospital, feel pain for organizations that's struggling to make payroll, or teachers that aren't getting paid right away, right? Our Torah teachers, our people that are teaching, right? Are they struggling? Teachers don't make that much, right? In a society that everything's so much more expensive, right? Have a little more for our Torah to ensure that our Torah teachers are secure and can focus on teaching. Right? It's just something to reflect on and think a little bit beyond ourselves and say, we have to think about at least what we know, at least what we can. We don't have the vision for the future, but to think about how we could, even in our time of joy, to go ahead and think about those that are less fortunate than we are and have that struggle. Okay, let's move on. We're going to jump to chapter 46. So it was finally revealed to Yaakov that Yosef is alive, right? The whole story with the daughter of Sarah Bas Asher, right? And Sarah Bas Asher, she played the harp and she sang it to him, right? And Yaakov gave her a blessing to live forever. Very interesting. It says that she lived forever, right? And then if chapter 41 says, Vayisei Yisrael v'chol Yisrael, which is Yaakov and all of his, went to Beersheba, and he brought sacrifices to Lakei Avi Yitzchak. He brought sacrifices to the God of his father Yitzchak. Now his father has passed away already, so he could speak about the God of his father. And he brought sacrifices, and then it starts off and says that Hashem told him, it says in a vision of night, Yaakov, which is a sign of love, right? And he said, I'm here. He says, I will go with you to Egypt, right? And a very beautiful paragraph where Hashem comforts him and say, you'll go, and yes, you'll go down to Mitzrayim. There will be an exile, but I'll be there with you, and I'll be there to take you out of exile also, right? A very beautiful little chapter there. But I saw brought down, right? The Ramban and others, and others speak about this. That why did he invoke the God of his father Yitzchak, right? Why not the God of his grandfather Abraham, or both, Abraham and Yitzchak, right? Like it's the same God, right? Like Abraham was the father of monotheism. Like why? So Rashi says, right? Rashi says very interesting, right? Chayv Adam Mechvod Aviv, right? Yosef Mechvod Zikna. Rashi says because one is obligated in the honor of his father and mother more than the honor of his grandfather and grandmother. Of course, you're obligated in the honor of your grandparents also, right? But one is obligated more in the honor of his parents than the honor of his grandparents. And therefore, he invoked his own respect for his father. He said, Elokei Avi Yitzchak, the God of my father Yitzchak. That's what Rashi says, right? Very interesting. There's very interesting halachic insights into this. What happens when your grandfather tells you, and your father tells you something different, right? So who do you listen to? Your father's obligated in the honor of his parent. Very interesting, right? I don't want to get into that, but it's always good just to know that Torah is endless, and it's always very interesting discussions that we find interesting, but it's all Torah, and there's a source of the Torah for it. But that's what Rashi says. The commodities and others bring down. I saw others speak about this idea of Yaakov Kamenetsky has a whole long essay on this, but that Yitzchak was the one that, if you remember when there was a famine, when Abraham had a famine back in Parsha Vayigash, right? He went down to Mitzrayim. When there was a famine in Parsha, he told us, right? And Yitzchak wanted to go down to Mitzrayim. What did God tell him? I'll tear you Mitzrayim. Do not go to Mitzrayim, right? And he went to Palestine, right? He said, you can't go to Mitzrayim. So they explain, right? And it's a little deep idea, but I just want to bring it out. I think it's just interesting Torah to reflect on it, to see how deep the Torah is. That and this is just scratching the surface, right? Torah is a lot deeper, right? But there's this idea that Yaakov didn't really want to go down to Mitzrayim. Yeah, Yaakov hasn't gone down to Mitzrayim yet. Right. He sent his children down. When there was a famine, he sent his children to get food. He was avoiding the situation. Right. He was already in Haran. He did his exile out of Eretz Yisrael. He came back. I don't want to deal with this. So he said he was invoking the Elokei Avi Yitzchak, Because he was saying, look, Hashem, Yitzchak, you didn't let Yitzchak to go down to church. So maybe tell me I'm not allowed to go down. And I don't know, we'll figure out how to bring Yosef up, or we'll have a communication back and forth. And again, tell Yosef he has to send us food, right? But he was invoking Yitzchak because Yitzchak Hashem told him not to go down to Mitzrayim. And I said to him, no. Yaakov, you're different. And everybody has their avod, everybody has their thing, right? Right? I'm the father of your father, right? Yitzchak and Abram, your fathers, right? Don't be scared of going down to Mitzrayim. I will be with you, right? Don't worry about it, right? But that's what Yaakov was trying to do over here, because he didn't want to go into exile. He didn't want to go out of Eretz Yisrael. He wanted to be in Eretz Yisrael. If as long as he could stay in Eretz Yisrael and figure it out, that's what he wanted to do. And that's what he's invoking Yitzchak. And along this lines, Asaf brought down, it is combining a few things together, that this is really an important lesson in exile, right? That there's a Lokei Yitzchak and a Lokei Avraham. Of course, it's the same God, but Avraham and Yitzchak had two different ways of serving Hashem within the frameworks of the Torah, right? We know Avram is called Avram is Chesed, right? Avram is all within, always teaching and going out and being in the world, which of course we need that, right? And Yitzchak is called Gevura, right? Yitzchak is sort of staying firm and strong. And of course, Abraham had that also. It's important to know. He excelled in this idea, right? Yitzchak also had a yeshiva. People came by the house. It wasn't like he was like, no, my doors are closed, right? He wasn't a miser, God forbid. He also taught, but his attribute was Gevura, was strength, right? And he was like a carbon. He was like a sacrifice. He was brought as a sacrifice. He was sort of more lofty. And Yitzchak was trying to connect to, when he was going down to Egypt, to exile, he said he was trying to connect to this avod of his father Yitzchak, right? Saying like, okay, we're going to go down to Mitzrayim, and I'm going to try to be in exile like Gevura, right? In this attribute of just, focusing and on a sacrifice, and just focusing just on this Gevura way of living, right? And Hashem said, no. I'm the father. When you go into exile, to real exile, right, you have to have a balance of both. Right? We have to live in a community that we're in, and we have to survive. We have to make sure that we have that Avram out of Chesed, and again, excelling in that. Not saying Yitzchak doesn't have that, of course. And we also have to have Yitzchak. We have to have that gevura. We have to have that strength of knowing when to say no. That's too far. That's not something that we. That's not something that we say is okay. That's going too far. We have to have that gevura, right? And that's why Yitzchak is the midah of Tiferes. And Tiferes is a combination of these two things, and that's really where Hashem is telling Yitzchak over here, Yaakov over here. Yaakov is trying to connect to the gevura more, right? And he was telling him, no. You're going down. You have the attribute of both, of Avram and Yitzchak combined together, right, of Tiferes. Right? So yes, we have to live in the society, but you're going to have to go into exile. You're going to have to be in Mitzrayim, right? But at the same time, I'm going to talk about this later. No, we'll just talk about it right now, right? Because we'll talk about it later on. We'll just skip for a minute in chapter 47, at the end of the Parsha, right? Chapter 47, verse 27, the last verse in this week's Parsha, right? So we're going to go out of order because we're going to say one more thing later on, if we have time, right? But the verse says like this. The verse says, "Yeshiv Yisrael be'eretz Mitzrayim be'eretz Goshen," right? And Yisrael, which is Yaakov, right? He lived in Eretz Mitzrayim be'eretz Goshen, in the land of Goshen. So I saw brought down, or I saw Rabbi Feinstein and others, Rabbi Schwab and others asked, right, a very simple question. I'm sure others asked this also, right? That we know that he's living in Eretz Mitzrayim. He should have just said, "Vayeshev Yisrael beGoshen, Eretz Goshen, in the province of Goshen." Right? We know that he was in Mitzrayim. It says he came down to Mitzrayim. We know Yosef's in Mitzrayim, and we know already he's in Mitzrayim. Right? Why does the Torah have to say be'eretz Mitzrayim be'eretz Goshen? Right? In the country of Mitzrayim, in the province of Goshen. Like, we know that. Right? We know he's in Mitzrayim. We just didn't know that he moved to Goshen. So they say that he moved to Goshen. Right? Why does it have to say Be'eretz Mitzrayim, Be'eretz Goshen? So Asaf brought down, I think where Moshe says this, that the Torah is teaching us that even though he was in Mitzrayim, he moved to Eretz Mitzrayim, but in Mitzrayim, he made sure to move to Goshen. He made sure to live with his family in Goshen, away from the hustle and bustle of Mitzrayim, away from the influences of Mitzrayim, right? To sort of create their own mini, safe zone, sort of, right? Its own mini, sanctuary city, right? Like it's a own place that he knew that his children could have a base medrash and have schooling and survive. Yes, they lived in Mitzrayim, and they might go work and this and that, and they did things, and the children Yosef came to Midian, but where they lived in their shtetl, right? They lived in I'm not saying to put walls around it, right, like in Europe, but they lived in their shtetl. They lived together in harmony. And that's what Hashem is telling Yaakov, and that's what he was learning. That's why the Torah tells us back by us that you are not just a Yitzchak, right? You are Avram and Yitzchak. You're at the Tiferes, right? Avicha, your fathers, you're going to go down with your father and your God of your father. When you go down to Mitzrayim, and the Jewish people always, we are Bnei Yaakov, Bnei Yisrael. That's what we're called, the children of Yisrael. Right? We have to live our lives with this power of Tiferes, which is a combination of, yes, we live in society, we're friendly, we're this, we're that, we help out, but at the same time we also have to have that gevura of knowing when not to mingle, when to hold strong, when to ensure that our children have a Jewish education. There's a city that I know, I'm not going to mention the name of the city, right? But it's unfortunate the people there were actually not the Greenblatt, right? Not Rabbi Greenblatt's uncle. I read a similar story. I'll say his story, right? In his book, when in the 50s, I think it was, or the 60s, 50s, I think it was, a certain city asked, some people came and asked him if he could help start a school there, a day school. Right, and he goes to the city and he speaks to the local rabbi, right? And he said, there's not enough people, not it's just fine, it's good, they're fine. We have a day school, we have a Sunday school, it's fine. And he said, no. He said, if I go around and I get 10 families to sign up, right, will you take this serious? He said, okay, you can do that. So he goes around, finally gets 10 families to sign up. So he goes to the rabbi, he says, let me see the list. He looks at the list, that family, they're on the other side of the tracks, they're not really part of this community, forget it, right? But not to set a different point, he said that rabbi has a big chalik in Gehenna, right? And for not ensuring, because you never know what influence this could have had. But the point I'm trying to bring out is that sometimes we're so focused on, no, we're part of this community, we're part of this, that's how it. No, we have to have that gevura now. We have to ensure that we have Jewish education. We have to ensure that we have a synagogue. We ensure we have classes. We have to ensure that we keep to our values of who we are. That's the gevura of Yitzchak. We also have the Tiferes, the chesed of Avram, where we have to, live in the society, donate to the hospitals, and be involved, and be involved in the government, and have APAC, and have these things. And we have to be involved. And ourselves and around. We have to have that balance, right? And that's what Yitzchak was trying to invoke by saying Elokei Avi Yitzchak, and Hashem said, no. You're going down, right? And he said, I'm your father. He didn't mention just Yitzchak. Avicha, your father and your grandfather, you're going to go down with both of those. And we're going to end with one more thing, because we said the last thing already when we spoke about Goshen. And again, that's very important. Same idea. And just to remind ourselves that the Torah is telling us that Yaakov realized that even though he's living in Mitzrayim, but he had to go move in Goshen. That's what also is something, just to talk about it for two more minutes, make it a little more practical. And again, this is not talking about any individual, and I'm not, every person has their own calculation and their own thing, right, and their own cheshbon, and has to have a private conversation. But just in general, right, our Goshen is every city. The Goshen that we have is a place near our synagogues, right? A place near our kosher food, a place near our mikvah, a place near our Jewish schools. That's our Goshen. Right? That's our Goshen, right? That's the same thing. Every Jewish community, right? Every city that has a Jewish community has their Goshen, and you see it. There's a greater, intensity of Jewish people in that neighborhood, and you can see the difference. You all drive around, you see, Hanukkah just finished, right? You drive around on every block, you see menorahs. You see people walking to shul. You see that's the environment of our Goshen. That's the environment of our Jewish community. And it's something just to reflect on, besides just the ability to be able to keep Shabbos better, right? And again, each individual has its own conversation. This is more on a general thing. But besides just the ability to be able to keep Shabbos better and to be closer to be able to buy Jewish food, but just the avirah, the environment, right, of being around, right, the Jewish people. Oh, the house is not exactly my life. It's maybe a little more expensive. Okay, that's part of being Jewish, right? Unfortunately, however way you look at it, that's part of being Jewish, right? I was talking. Who was I? I was talking to someone the other day, I was talking to someone, my chavrusa last night, and somehow we came talking about tuition and things, and that's sort of my day-to-day conversations, right? But his kids are out of school already, and we started talking about it. And he was telling me he was reading an article about this family that someone was talking about. Didn't say who, but in the tri-state area, that combined the two families make over $250,000, right? And they're struggling. They're still struggling. Because being Jewish, yes, it's true. Being Jewish is more expensive with the tuitions and this and that, and it's true. Hey, you have to learn how to finance, and so he asked me what I thought. I said, listen, New York is a little different than by us, but I said, based off, seeing different applications, $250,000 should be be able to, if they know how to manage their money, they should be able to, if they have other loans and this, but that's sort of the conversation that we're having, but. We're filling out a form for the school, and what's considered poverty line, in the secular world for a family of six is $85,000, which is crazy. You can't even blink a family of six. Here, yes, it is life. It's more expensive, right? It's true, but we gain so much more, right? We gain so much more than that. So this is sort of on a more practical application, how we could have our Goshen. It's just something to think about, living in the environment of where the Jewish people live, right? That's something to reflect on. That is the Goshen, the having that Avirah. Okay, we'll just end off with one more thing. Chapter 47, verse 14. No. Then, 47, 14. I was looking at 46, 14. Yeah. Okay. It says, so the story now goes back to after it speaks about the tribes came in front of Paro, and they said we're shepherds, right? Yosef told them to say shepherds because that was sort of like a no-no from the tribe because the sheep was their god, right? The Paro wanted them to come join the army. He said, no, stay away. Let's get back to that whole thing, stay away. And the whole conversation Yaakov had with Paro, we spoke about that a little bit last year, right? Why did Yaakov get punished? Also, we spoke about that last year. But then the story goes back to Yosef, his dealings in Mitzrayim, right? And it says, verse 14, Yosef collected all the money. And he collected all the money in Mitzrayim, right? Everybody was starving. He collected all the money in Mitzrayim, right? Eretz Canaan and Eretz Canaan, right? B'shevar Hashem him sovrim. But Yosef as a kesef base Paro. Yosef brought the money to the house of Paro, right? So the commentators want to know, why does it have to say that he brought the money to the house of Paro? Right? There's not an extra word in the Torah. Why does it have to mention this? Like, what's it trying to teach us? So I saw the Sephora said Right? The Sephora points out, the Sephora lived in the 1300s, 13 around that era. Says in Rabbi and I think Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, I think it's Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky or Rabbi Schwab that expand on this a little bit. That says that Yosef, the Torah wanted to make sure that say that Yosef made sure that the money went to base power. What's the purpose of that? Like, what's the emphasis? So the emphasis is because the money that was collected was really Paro's money, right? But Yosef, listen, he was second command. He could have skimmed a little bit for himself, get a little rich on the side. Paro probably wouldn't have looked. He could have taken a little bit, for himself. Paro, hey, we instead of $1 trillion is $999 billion. I know what's the difference? He could have skimmed here and there, or played around with it. The Torah is made. The Torah is saying it's witnessing, is affirming that Yosef made sure to bring all the money to base Paro. The money went directly to base Paro. Then he got his salary, right, of whatever his salary as second in command was. But he brought all the money to base Paro, and they expanded this. How important it is. We have to be honest in our business, right? Especially when we're dealing with non-Jews, but even when we're dealing with, of course, when we're dealing with Jews and non-Jews or government or whatever it is, how important we have to be. We have to be with our taxes, with our business dealings, right, with our finances, right. The Torah goes out of its way to emphasize that Yosef did not skim, because besides maybe being in trouble, but have been a tremendous Hashem. Oh, look, the Ivri that we brought in, look, he skims money. He skims the money, right? How careful we have to be, right, to ensure that all the money went to base power. And that's, I don't think I have to emphasize the lesson to that, practical to our day-to-day lives, how important it is that we have to be careful. Right? Sometimes I have people say, but can we do this? Can we do that? And say, no, we speak to our accountants, right? Everything has to be updated. We can't play games this and play games that. Whenever we do things, right? But everything's above board. Speak to our accountant, speak to, if it needs to speak to a lawyer, to a lawyer that deals with, everything has to be above board. Everything has to be made sure that it's done in the proper way, right? And besides that, it's the right thing to do, but it also, if someone gets caught, right? The Chil Hashem, the desecration of Hashem's name, right? Even I'm not religious. They don't care. Once they know you're a Jew, you'll be made the most religious Jew in the world because all of a sudden you did something. It doesn't make a difference if you're religious, you're not religious, right? We're all grouped together, right? And we have to be so careful about that. And that's why the Torah goes ahead and emphasizes and says, right, that Yosef brought all the money to base Paro, right, to show that he was extremely diligent and careful not to cheat the house of Paro, right, and to avoid a Chil Hashem. Thank you all for joining us this evening, and have a good evening.